Welcome back, everybody, to part two of our tutorial series. Today we'll be covering creating classes using Unreal Engine 4. And so classes will cover everything basically from your character to weapons, to vehicles. Pretty much everything in the game will be down to a class. So we're going to go over briefly just how to create them and then how to get them in the engine and be able to work with them pretty easily. So to get started, let's head over to GitHub. I created a repository for this tutorial. I'll put a link down in the description. And so if any of you guys want to follow along exactly with what I'm doing, you can go ahead and clone this repository, or you can kind of just watch and apply it to your own projects. So let's go ahead and clone this bad boy. So again, we're going to use git clone, copy the URL, and this shouldn't take too long because this project's pretty small, so it should only take about a minute. Okay, so once that's finished cloning, go ahead and just close this and open up File Explorer, and let's navigate to where we cloned it. Nope, that's the wrong one. Let's go back. Here we go, UE4 tutorial. So like we did last time, we're going to find the U project file, right click on it, and select the Generate Visual Studio project files. And we're also going to ensure that it's going to use the engine we want it to. So I'm actually going to switch that right now. Just going to do some stuff. And once all that is taken care of, you can go ahead and open up the solution. All right. So the first thing we're going to want to do in order to add a new class to this project is we're first going to actually just run this. And what this is going to do is it's going to open up the editor. So it's going to ask us if we want to build it, click yes, and then we just got to wait for it to finish building. All right, now that that's done building, as you can see here, this is just a basic level with really nothing pre-built. So I just started a new project using the basic C++ code. So this isn't a template, it doesn't have the character already made. This way we can really go through step by step and understand the entire creation process. But before I go forward in creating the class, I just want to take a quick second to kind of talk about file structure and organization. And so this is something that is pretty important, and I would recommend if you're working as a team or by yourself that you take a second to figure out kind of the organization of your code. It really can be anything you want, but as long as you know what it is and everyone else on your team knows, then you're good to go. How I like to do it is separate things into a private and public folder. So let's do that right here. And so private will be all the CPP files, and the public will be the .h files. And then here I'll organize them even more. Create something called like player, which all the code associated with the player will go there. And then we can create even more folders later on for like weapons and pickups and that kind of thing. So now that that's done, to add a new class to your game is pretty simple. But the way you do it is a little bit different than if you're just making a normal like C++ coding project. When you're using Unreal Engine 4, you have to come into the editor first, load up your game, and then once that's all taken care of, you're going to the top left corner to the file, and you're going to click on that, and about halfway, a little bit past halfway down, there's the option to add code to project. So you're just going to select that. And what it's now going to ask you is to choose the parent class. And for those of you who don't really know what a parent class is, in in coding, the parent is basically something that you will like inherit from. So the class we will be creating will typically be known as a child class. And basically the child class is going to inherit certain functionality that the parent class already has. That way you can really reduce code duplication and kind of just make the project a little bit simpler and easier to understand. Unreal Engine 4 comes with a lot of pre-built parent classes. So depending on what you need, you're going to want to scroll through here and find what you're looking for. We're going to create a character, and so we'll just select this character one. But if you had maybe perhaps made a custom class, maybe you had like a super cool character class, you could actually click this checkbox up here for show all classes. Then you can type in some custom class here and be able to find it. Since we don't have any custom classes, we'll just pick the base character class and continue with that. And here's where we're going to name the class. And I'll just take a minute to kind of talk about naming nomenclature. So this is especially important when you are working as a team. You're going to want to get together as a group and kind of figure out your kind of naming scheme for things. This will include, how you will name classes, how you will name like member variables, how you will name functions. It really helps when everyone's kind of on the same page, and that way when you're like jumping around between other people's code, they're not kind of doing things differently, and it gets confusing because everyone's doing their own way. So it is really worth it to take some time at the beginning to talk these things over and just, spend a couple minutes figuring out what you want, and then from there it's pretty easy. So what typically I do is we're working on a game, and this game is going to be called like tutorial game. So I'll just call this character tutorial character. And typically what I would do is then if I made like a weapon, I would call it like tutorial weapon, and then or I'd make a tutorial vehicle. And so that would be kind of like the naming nomenclature that I would implement. Again, it can be different based on your group or your preferences. And here we're going to actually choose the location of the file we're going to put. So this is we're going to use that file structure we just created a second ago. We're going to come down here and put it in the player folder. And you just want to make sure that the header is going into public and the CPP is going into private. That all looks good, so then we can go ahead and create the class. All right, so then what it does is we'll then bring Visual Studio's back into focus. And here is our new class. It's been added into the project. We can see our tutorial character. Here's the CPP and the header. And so I'm going to also take a moment and explain a little some of the basic features when working with the code using Unreal Engine 4. And so let's just make these sections. Okay, so I pretty much divided the header into 3 categories: private, protected, and public. And for those of you who don't know kind of what these do, private basically means only this class knows about it. So it only itself is aware of private things. Meanwhile, with protected, children of this class will be able to know about certain variables or functions in the protected section. And finally, public is everything can access anything in public. And so generally, you want to put almost everything in private, except for obviously, getters and setters and other certain functions that the game will use to interact with your character. But for the most part, you don't want things reaching into your code and touching it. So you really want to kind of use public as a gateway to access, some private stuff. And so we're just going to do a quick example real quick, and I'm going to add, and so I can explain a couple things. I'm going to create a variable, and I'll just do something simple right here. I'll just create, a character name. And so a couple things to point out here is all variables, not all variables, but you can add this, they call it a macro, I believe, in UE4. But you can add this uProperty macro above a variable. And what this allows you to do is this is what allows the editor to be aware of this particular variable. And so we can actually go in here and add some code, and I'll explain in a second. And I'll come back and explain this in a second. But for now, I also want to talk about the uFunction macro. Here we go. And we'll just make a getter and setter for the character name. So we can do get, forgot to give it a type, fname, get character name. And this will take in an fname, and we'll call it new name. Oh, whoops. I was thinking of the setter. So we'll do that set, and then we'll also add a getter. That's not correct either. That should be void. And here we go, fname. It's going to be get character name. And this won't take any parameters. All right, and again, I'm going to add a little snippet of code here, and I'll come back and explain this as we move forward. So now that we have the header file all set up, we have to go over and implement these functions into the .cpp. So we can come over here. So the first thing we're going to do is the set character name. So we're going to do the void, a tutorial character, colon, colon, set character name. And all we're going to do is set our character name equal to the new name. And then we're going to add the get. And all this is going to do is return the character name. All right, save everything, and let's rebuild. All right, so once that's finished building and the editor's back up, we can go ahead and I'll kind of show you how we can now work with that class in the editor in kind of a more manageable way. So in our down here in our content browser, let's come into blueprints and let's create a new folder, and we'll call this one ponds. And down here we're going to create a new blueprint class, and then here at the bottom there's a little drop down where we can see all classes, and I can type in the, what do we call it again, tutorial character. Here he is. And we can just call him the player character. Whoops. So basically what we did is we created a blueprint of the C++ class that we had just previously created. And what this allows it to do is it allows us to more easily interface with the class that we just created. So if you see here, I open it up. You can look over here, and this is called the default values panel. And so what we can do is we can now see a bunch of information that we had programmed into the class. Most of these things are a result of the fact that we chose the parent class to be a character. And so it already has some like pre-built-in functionality. But we can also see the stuff that we just added. So up here at the top right, under character information, we can see our character name. And so if we go back to the code, this is what the U property did. The first part, which says edit default only, is dictating how this variable is able to be edited within the editor. And so if we go back over, that is basically allowing us to change the name right there. The next part that I'd like to talk about is right here we have it set category equals character info. Basically, this is a way of organizing the code. Right here we have that drop down which says character info, and that means anything with the category tag of character info will be placed in that drop down area. And this is just a way of grouping similar variables together to make the code more manageable and easy to understand. Lastly, I want to talk about U functions and how they interface with the editor. And so up here at these tabs, we have something called the event graph. And what we're looking at here is what Unreal Engine 4 calls blueprints, which is its visual scripting language. So we can then pull off here from this begin play event and able to call functions from our code. Let's first get a reference to self. And so if you're familiar with C++ coding, this is the same as calling this dot or this arrow, just to make sure that you're calling the function on the correct thing. So we can then come here and we can call our function to get character name. And there you see it's appearing right there in the character info category. So if we go back to the code and look in U function, we see that we made it blueprint callable and we put it in the character info section. U functions are similar to U properties in that the first kind of parameter that we put into it, we are dictating its accessibility. And so by blueprint callable is what allows it to appear here in the event graph and that we can call it. The second part, which we put the category, is exactly the same as how we did with the U property. We can set the category equal to something, which can be anything. We could have called it cheese hamburgers. And that category would have appeared in the editor as a way for us to organize our code. And that's it for today. I hope you guys tune in next time. In our next section of the tutorial, we're going to go over more about the blueprints and how those kind of interact with the game and with the code. And we're going to go into a lot of detail there. So I hope you guys watch the next section. See you.